All right, so this is a translation and discussion of Pliny's letter 727, chapter 12. Maybe we'll go into chapter 13. We'll have to see about how the time goes. But now we're moving on to the third ghost story. Remember, the first ghost story was Curtius Rufus. The second was about Athenodorus and the haunted house. And so now we have this third one. And so we continue. He says, does Pliny, the author of this letter, I trust or I believe the ones affirming. Yet again, we have a present active participle that we are substantizing, and it is in the dative case because remember, credo takes dative objects. And so indeed, also I believe the ones affirming these things. Hype refers to the previous ghost story that we have just most recently talked about. And so Pliny is saying, I believe those that have told this story. Nevertheless, he then goes on, the Illud is now, since the Kike talks about the previous ghost story, this Illud is going to be talking about the next ghost story. And so Pliny then says, I am able to affirm this new ghost story, that new ghost story that's about to be told, for others. And so he is implying that I personally was involved in this ghost story, and so I am going to be the one that can bear witness and affirm that these things are true. So, est, there is a libertus. Remember that the libertus is a person who has been manumitted. Manumission is the process of freeing a slave, and once you have become manumitted, you are no longer a servus, but instead you are going to be a libertus. It is at that point that probably your former dominus is now going to become your patronus, or patron as it were, and instead of a servus as a libertus, you are going to become one of their clientes, or the plural is going to be clientes as it were. And this relationship between the patron and the client is that they are dependent upon you for support, and you are dependent upon them for support. But different kinds of support, obviously, as you will probably have different economic abilities and other sorts of places within society. And so, therefore, there is a freedman, a libertus, for me. This is your dative of possession. I have a freedman, not illiterate. And so this is a guy who's somewhat educated, and thus it probably will lend a little bit more plausibility to whatever it is that he might report to Pliny, his previous master, but now his patron. Nevertheless, a minor frater, remember that minor is the comparative of parvus. Parvus is small, minor means smaller, but in this context it's probably going to mean like younger. And so a younger brother was resting in the same bed. Remember that it with a D-E-M is going to mean the same. Contrast that with qui quod with a D-A-M means indeed, and then you have, of course, the always tricky, and I think we have it right there. It is not an is-a-id with a dim, nor is it a qui quod with a dom, and so if it's not quite either, it is the word that simply means indeed. But here we have, obviously, the same modifying lecto. And so, a younger brother was resting in the same bed, because of from in on that, with this guy. The hope referring, obviously, to the libertus, who is not uneducated. Is, and so here it's going to be talking about the younger brother. He, from is-a-id, seemed, remember that video videre vidi visus in the passive has the meaning of seem. And since this is obviously perfect tense, you could tell because it's a perfect passive participle, and a present of the verb to be, making a perfect passive verb, we're going to translate seemed. So he seemed to himself to see some random guy, a certain guy, and again, this is your qui quote that I have just pointed out up here, with a D-A-M. So, and really, this used to be an M of quem dom, but whenever you have an M preceding a D, often that M will turn into an N. So he seemed to himself to see, to spot, to discern, and that's where we get the word, put an E-I-S on it, and there you get discern, a certain fellow sitting on the couch, on the bed. Toro is another word for bed, along with lectus that we saw previously used right up here. Que, and this rando guy, this certain fellow, moving kultros. Kultros are scissors, and so he's moving scissors, suo capiti, to his head. Now, I think that the most key word in this series of clauses is going to probably be sibi. And so that is when it says it seemed to himself, or he seemed to himself, it's a situation to where I think a lot of people have had it in their lives, to where, especially in childhood, you don't know whether what you think happened really happened or whether it was a dream. You often need somebody else to confirm, did we do this together, or did I just imagine that? Did I just dream it up? And so that is what the Civi here, I think, is really forcing upon us. This idea that he thinks he saw this happen, but you can't quite be sure, because we've all had the experiences of questioning ourselves, did that really happen? Or was that a dream? Did I make that up? And that's, I think, kind of the sense of what we have here. And so again, he thinks or seemed to himself to see a rando guy sitting on the bed and moving scissors towards his own head, and even amputating, removing is what it means, a present active participle, the hairs, the capillos, which of course are why capillaries are called capillaries. They are so slender vessels in the body that indeed they're almost like hairs. And indeed, amputating those hairs, removing those hairs, ex ipso vertice, from the vertex, the crown, the top itself. And so it's not as though he's cutting the extremities, the ends of the hairs, kind of like when you get split ends, you want to get a little trim. No, no, no. He is making the cutting right up here at the top. And when it shined, when it became light, in other words, you can obviously have the benefit of sunlight to be able to see, because they don't have electrical light. When it shined, perfect tense, he himself, having been tonsured. To tonsure is a word in English that means to shave. And as a matter of fact, if you see medieval monks, how they have the center part of the top of their head shaved with the hair around the outside, that type of haircut is literally called a tonsure, spelled like this right here. And there it is. And so, here's the perfect passive participle. He himself, having been shaven, circa verticem, around the crown, and so literally his haircut is exactly like that of medieval monks as it is described here. And so therefore, having been sheared around the, or sheared, shaven, tonsured, around the crown, around the vertex, implied of his head, hairs lying around. This is not from the verb to throw. That would be yakientes. And so this would be yakientes, hairs throwing. But because it is from yakeo yakeare, a second conjugation, you have it as just yakintes. Hairs lying, implied around, are found, are discovered. Reperio, reperire. Remember that aperio means to open, operio means to cover, and reperio means to find. And so therefore, in this story, a fellow thinks that he has seen a ghost in the middle of the night, and importantly, the next morning there is empirical evidence. There are hairs lying all around that are found in the daylight. So, that's it for chapter 12. Your next installment is obviously going to be chapter 13. Good luck and keep studying.